KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Brad Turner, in today for Erin O'Toole. A few weeks back, someone sent me an unusual article. It was about rock climbing near Boulder, and it ran on the Boulder Reporting Lab website. The writer's name was Simon Testa, and he told his story using data and statistics. Simon's article wrestled with the risks associated with one particular form of rock climbing, and Simon had to make some choices as a result of what he found. So our guest today on In The NoCo is Simon. He lives in Boulder, and his favorite hobby is something that looks deadly to a lot of people. He climbs up huge rock walls without climbing ropes. It's called scrambling, and Simon has made hundreds of ascents without ropes over the past decade. His favorite scrambling spot is the Flatirons, those towering rock formations outside Boulder.
People, when they talk about the Flatirons, they always say they're iconic, and I think they really are. If you're looking from Boulder out to the west, you see these massive sandstone slabs poking up out of the open space. Some of the larger ones are over 1,000 feet, and they're just spectacular to look at.
What is unique about the Flatirons that makes them great for scrambling?
That is a great question. And it's really the angle that they lie at. They're kind of inclined about 45 to 50 degrees. They're really high friction, so you stick to them well.
What do you love about scrambling as opposed to climbing with ropes?
Well, I would say it's my favorite thing to do of all the things I do in the outdoors. There is inherent risks of climbing without a rope. You remain really focused, and that kind of gives you a flow state, a bit like meditation, and there's a real benefit to that too. It's just so freeing to be up there without being encumbered by the rope.
In 2024, you sort of paused and wondered if scrambling up the Flatirons might be dangerous. What made you stop and think about that?
Yeah, so there were 2 fatalities within a week in December of last year. It was deeply saddening. These people, right, are going to be deeply missed by their families, and it was very sad news. I'd never seen an analysis of what the risk actually was in tangible numbers. So that was the impetus to me to really dig in.
So Simon pulled the data from old news articles in the local paper, as well as other sources.
The Daily Camera Archive, the American Alpine Club, the Boulder Sheriff's website.
He found records going back to 1922 and identified 16 people who died in scrambling-related accidents on the Flatirons.
And in my mind's eye, I thought I was going to gather this information, calculate the risk, and in my mind, I thought it was going to be less risky than the numbers would suggest. But, the reality of the data, that's not the case.
Simon also set out to put the risk of scrambling in perspective. So he compared it to driving, which is something that has risks, but that most of us survive from day to day. And then he compared scrambling to base jumping, which is an extreme sport in which someone parachutes off a tall object, like a tower or bridge. And the risk of scrambling was somewhere in the middle.
The mortality rate for scrambling, the average is about 1 in 100,000. So that's about 50 times riskier than driving in the US and about 50 times less risky than base jumping.
So you compared it to an everyday sort of acceptable risk that most people do, and then a crazy risk that would make most people sort of not want to do it in base jumping.
Yes.
Interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. The numbers were surprising to me. Looking at all the possible risks I could think of, the one that really seemed the most prevalent was complacency. I think with experienced people, we can maybe become more complacent as we're doing these things. I thought the incidents and the fatalities would be skewed to people that were inexperienced. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I've done this a lot. I'm pretty experienced. It's less likely to happen to me. So one thing I do now is as I step onto the rock, I take a moment and I remind myself that this is risky and complacency is a risk. And I tell myself not to be complacent.
Now that you've done that analysis and crunched the numbers, do you feel more vulnerable when you go scrambling now?
I think maybe not more vulnerable, but definitely more aware of the risks.
What's the difference?
Well, I feel like if I'm really stay uncomplacent, if that's a word, and, think about the other risks like weather and, things falling off. Another thing I've chosen to do, which I didn't do before, is wear a helmet. So, I know there's risk, but I think if you're careful, you're less likely to find yourself in a situation that might end not well. But it's something I really, really love to do. It would be hard not to do.
I think most people would say climbing the Flatirons without ropes looks pretty dangerous. Why do you think the numbers convinced you of the danger rather than the direct experience scrambling up a rock wall?
That's interesting. Well, I guess, I've climbed on and off for many years, more so when I was younger. For me, I know climbing up them is within my ability. And I think it's more of a logical decision for me. I find it very interesting that many people that do scramble the Flatirons come from professions like engineers. I'm a geologist, computer programmers, typically folks that have kind of a logical mindset. And I think that contributes to it. You can, in your mind, logically think about the risks and your experience level rather than just having this visceral fear of going up something without a rope.
What advice do you give to someone who's scrambling the Flatirons now that you wouldn't have given them before?
Risk aside, right, it's inherently dangerous to climb up a cliff without a rope. I think everyone understands that, right? So just know what you're getting into. And then for people that are more experienced, I would just reiterate to not be complacent.
So you're still doing what you love, but you're being a little bit wiser about how you do it.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Simon Testa has already been out scrambling on the Flatirons 30 times this spring, wearing a helmet now, of course. He said his article in the Boulder Reporting Lab got a ton of response from the climbing community in Boulder, and we'll post a link in our show notes and at KUNC.org so you can read it for yourself. We'll also post a link to Simon's guidebook for scrambling. It's called Best Flatiron Scrambles. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Brad Turner. Thanks for listening.